Arvind Malhotra thought he had found the perfect partner in Rhea Kapoor, but behind her charm and elegance lay a dangerous double life, and his discovery would lead to a shocking tragedy that no one saw coming. Arvind Malhotra had built his life on discipline, strategy, and patience. At 46, he was the kind of man people admired from a distance. His business importing luxury furniture from India to Australia had grown steadily over the years, placing him among the well-established entrepreneurs in Melbourne's South Asian community. Despite his financial success, Arvind often felt a quiet emptiness when he returned each night to his large but silent home. His friends believed he had postponed marriage for too long, choosing work over companionship, but he insisted he was simply waiting for the right person. That person seemed to appear when he met Rhea Kapoor during a charity gala. She carried herself with confidence, speaking effortlessly with guests, moving through the room like someone who understood social circles better than most. At 39, she was admired for her elegance and her ability to turn ordinary events into high-profile gatherings. Arvind saw in her a balance he had never found before: charm without chaos, ambition without noise. Their first interactions were simple, yet something about her energy stayed with him long after the event ended. Their connection grew quickly. Rhea introduced him to a lifestyle filled with gallery openings, networking dinners, and cultural events he had rarely attended before. She brought color into the orderly structure of his life, and he embraced it without hesitation. Within months, their relationship was the talk of friends and acquaintances who viewed them as a fitting, mature match. Their wedding was intimate yet grand, combining traditional Indian rituals with modern touches that reflected both of their personalities. For Arvind, it felt like a new beginning, a promise that the loneliness he once knew had finally ended. He believed he was stepping into a future shaped by trust, stability, and companionship, unaware that the truth behind Rhea's world was far more complicated than he could ever imagine. The early weeks of marriage brought a warmth Arvind had long hoped for, but small irregularities soon began to chip away at his sense of comfort. Rhea's schedule became unpredictable, filled with sudden meetings and urgent client calls that seemed to appear at odd hours. She often left the house dressed elegantly, claiming she had last-minute event planning emergencies. Arvind tried to understand the demands of her profession, yet something about her patterns felt strangely rehearsed, as if every excuse had been prepared long before the moment arrived. Her phone became a constant companion, always locked, always within reach. Arvind noticed she stepped away whenever it rang, lowering her voice until it turned into a faint murmur behind closed doors. When he casually asked about her clients, her answers were brief and vague, offering no details about the projects she was supposedly managing. She returned home late on several nights, carrying no equipment, no files, and no signs of event-related work. Instead, she brought only the scent of unfamiliar places and the tension of someone hiding more than she admitted. Financial clues added to Arvind's unease. Rhea made large purchases that didn't match the modest success of her business. Designer clothing, luxury accessories, and high-end electronics arrived regularly, each justified as necessary for maintaining her professional image. Yet her business income remained strangely inconsistent, with no clear explanation for the growing expenses. Arvind discovered unexpected withdrawals from their shared account, small enough to avoid immediate suspicion but frequent enough to raise questions once he looked closely. He tried convincing himself that every marriage required adjustment and that Rhea simply had her own way of managing things. But the distance between them grew silently. Her smiles felt shorter, her expressions harder to read, and her presence more like a visitor than a partner. Arvind sensed that beneath her polished personality lay a maze he had only begun to notice, a world she kept tightly sealed away from him. While sorting through household paperwork one quiet afternoon, Arvind came across a small metal box tucked behind old folders in Rhea's study drawer. It looked out of place, almost hidden on purpose. Curious yet cautious, he opened it, expecting routine documents. Instead, he found something that made his heartbeat quicken. Inside were 2 passports bearing Rhea's name, one Indian and one Australian, but with different residential addresses. The photos looked like her, yet the details told 2 separate stories. Confusion washed over him as he tried to make sense of how one person could legally carry two distinct identities. Under the passports were flight stubs from multiple international trips that Rhea had never mentioned, dated during months she had claimed to be overloaded with local events. There were hotel receipts from Singapore, Dubai, and Kuala Lumpur, with signatures resembling hers. A few folded photographs showed her standing with unfamiliar people in settings that looked nothing like the elegant functions she usually described. None of it matched the version of her life she had shared with him. Arvind felt a heavy tension build in his chest. He tried to convince himself these items might belong to earlier phases of her life, perhaps before they met. But the dates were recent, some even from weeks after their wedding ceremonies. The realization that she had been traveling secretly while assuring him she was working in Melbourne struck him deeply. This discovery pushed him to look further. He checked bank statements and noticed patterns of spending that aligned suspiciously with the unexplained trips. His uncertainty turned into a burning need for answers. Instead of confronting Rhea immediately, he decided to gather more information. He contacted a private investigator, hoping for clarity. The private investigator worked quietly, gathering fragments of Rhea's hidden activities piece by piece. Within days, he returned with information that unsettled Arvind far more than the passports and travel records ever had. Rhea's event planning business was only a thin surface layer of her real life. Behind the public charm and perfectly curated image, she was connected to an underground network involved in the movement of high-value, restricted luxury goods. Expensive watches, rare jewelry, designer items, and limited-edition collectibles were being traded through discreet channels that avoided taxes, import rules, and official documentation. Her role was subtle but vital. She used her social skills, wide contacts, and polished personality to build trust with sellers and buyers who preferred to stay invisible. She attended private parties not for entertainment but to finalize secret deals. She maintained multiple identities to keep her professional and underground circles separate. The investigator found that Rhea had at least 3 different aliases, each connected to separate bank accounts. These identities allowed her to switch roles seamlessly depending on the situation and the people she was dealing with. Arvind learned that Australian authorities had already taken notice. Rhea's frequent international travel, inconsistent financial statements, and sudden rise in personal luxury had placed her on a watch list. Investigators had quietly begun monitoring her movements, trying to identify her role in a larger operation responsible for smuggling small but extremely valuable items across borders. She had managed to stay ahead of detection by constantly changing her patterns, using different airports, and traveling through countries where customs checks were more relaxed. As Arvind read through the investigators' reports, he felt a sinking realization. The woman he believed he had married for love and companionship had built an entirely separate world based on. Arvind spent several nights revisiting every moment of his relationship, trying to understand how he had failed to see the truth. The more he reflected, the more he realized how carefully Rhea had shaped every part of her image. She had presented herself as independent yet affectionate, ambitious yet grounded. She offered just enough openness to appear genuine but withheld anything that would reveal who she truly was. Each memory now felt like a piece of a puzzle he hadn't known he was assembling. He remembered how she insisted on handling certain financial matters herself, claiming she didn't want to burden him. At the time, it felt considerate. Now it felt calculated. The private investigator had traced several questionable loans taken under Arvind's name, approved through forged signatures that matched his handwriting too closely. She had used his stable reputation to secure funds, then diverted the money into accounts tied to her aliases. Arvind realized she hadn't married him for companionship, she had married him for cover. Her social confidence, once a quality he admired, now looked like a strategic tool. She navigated gatherings with ease, identifying wealthy individuals, influential business owners, and those who seemed willing to invest in luxury. Arvind understood that every outing he attended with her was an opportunity for her to strengthen her network. Their marriage had given her legitimacy in circles she previously entered with caution. His respectable status as a businessman became a shield that deflected suspicion away from her. Emotionally, Arvind felt trapped between betrayal and disbelief. He couldn't reconcile the woman who sat beside him at dinner with the person orchestrating secret deals across continents. The charm that once drew him in now felt like a razor disguised in silk. He recognized how deeply she had manipulated him, using affection to distract him from inconsistencies and silence him with momentary warmth. The night before everything unraveled, Arvind found himself sitting alone in his dimly lit living room, surrounded by documents, printed reports, and bank statements scattered across the floor. The evidence collected over the past weeks painted a picture far darker than anything he had imagined. Each paper he picked up carried another layer of deceit: fake signatures, unexplained transactions, hidden accounts, and travel records that contradicted every story Rhea had ever told him. It felt as though he had been living beside a stranger who had quietly rewritten every part of his life without him noticing. As he tried to organize the information, his phone rang. It was the private investigator, his tone unusually serious. He informed Arvind that authorities were preparing to question him within days regarding several suspicious financial movements linked to Rhea. The thought of being associated with her crimes shook him deeply. His business, something he had built over 20 years, could crumble overnight. His clients, employees, and reputation could be lost because of actions he never knew about. The fear of being dragged into legal trouble tightened around him like a vice. Arvind hardly slept. He paced from room to room, trying to understand how he had allowed such chaos to infiltrate his orderly world. By dawn, he felt exhausted but unable to rest. Every corner of the house reminded him of Rhea's presence: her perfumes, her clothes, her carefully curated decor. Yet now each item felt tainted, as if it belonged to a stranger who had invaded his life under false pretenses. He returned to her study and opened the metal box again, staring at the dual passports, travel stubs, and photographs. Each object felt like a betrayal carved into physical form. As he gathered more of her belongings, he discovered a small ledger hidden beneath a stack of magazines, filled with coded notes likely tied to her secret dealings. The weight of everything became unbearable. When Rhea stepped through the front door that morning, the atmosphere inside the house felt heavier than ever. Arvind had spent the entire night drowning in documents, emotions, and fear, and his exhaustion showed in the rigid way he stood. The moment she entered, he placed everything he had discovered onto the table: passports, receipts, coded ledgers, and financial records. Her eyes scanned the items without the slightest tremor of panic. Instead, her calm, unreadable expression deepened the intensity inside the room. Arvind realized in that instant that the woman he married did not fear exposure. She behaved as though she had prepared for this possibility long before it happened. Her coldness struck him more painfully than the lies themselves. There was no attempt to explain, no sign of regret, and no acknowledgement of the harm she had caused. She simply looked at the evidence as if it belonged to someone else, as though the chaos surrounding their lives was an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. Arvind felt the last piece of emotional stability inside him crumble. He had expected shock, guilt, or even anger, but the emptiness in her eyes revealed a truth he had not fully grasped: she had never been emotionally attached to him at all. Her silence felt sharper than any accusation. The distance between them grew wider with every passing second, turning the room into a battleground of unspoken realities. Arvind saw not a partner who had made mistakes, but a calculated individual who had used his trust, his name, and his resources without hesitation. The betrayal he felt was no longer abstract; it became a physical weight pressing down on him. His mind raced with the consequences waiting just beyond this moment: police questioning, legal threats, the collapse of his business, and the humiliation of being unknowingly tied to criminal activities. Panic rose in his chest, mixing with anger until both became indistinguishable. The sound that followed the violent moment echoed through the house and then faded into a heavy stillness. Arvind stood motionless, unable to process what he had done. The documents scattered around him looked almost surreal, as if they belonged to someone else's life. He sank to the floor beside Rhea's body, overwhelmed by a mixture of shock, grief, and disbelief. Hours passed without him noticing. He remained frozen in the same spot, staring at the life that had ended and the future that had vanished with it. The house, once filled with elegant decorations and carefully chosen details, now felt colder and emptier than ever. Outside, the neighborhood slowly began to wake. A neighbor walking past noticed the front door slightly open and sensed something was wrong. Moments later, police arrived in response to the emergency call. They found Arvind sitting silently, his hands trembling, his eyes unfocused. He offered no resistance and barely spoke. Officers quickly secured the area, assessing the scene and collecting the documents that hinted at the hidden world Rhea had built. Investigators soon realized the crime was not only a case of domestic tragedy but also a doorway into an intricate network of underground dealings. As the investigation unfolded, Rhea's double life became clearer. The coded ledger, multiple identities, unexplained bank accounts, and international travel patterns connected her to a broader smuggling operation already under federal scrutiny. Her involvement had been deeper than Arvind ever suspected, and authorities confirmed that she had been under quiet observation for months. Media outlets seized the story, describing her as a woman balancing two contrasting worlds, glamour on the surface and secrecy beneath it. Arvind's life shattered instantly. He was charged with murder and taken into custody, his once admired reputation replaced by headlines filled with shock and speculation.